Yeah. So if you look at it in as a narration, 136 people in University of Hyderabad have contracted, not University of Hyderabad, sorry, IIT Hyderabad, have contracted COVID. Now the question, that is the narration. That is the narrative bit. It's telling you what happened. And in that sense, it's descriptive. Okay, in that sense, it is absolutely descriptive. Now, if you need to have a requirement which is, say, uh, if you need to have an explanation about why this happened, okay, then you require theory. Now, theory would explain why 136 people have contracted COVID. So what is if this is a narrative, then what is the theory? A simplistic understanding of theory would be that people were packed into rooms, uh, and therefore, uh, since this Omicron is probably the variable that is uh, spreading among people, it is called a super spreader. So if we are looking at that as a super spreader, then fine, that is still not a theory. It is still a narration. Because you're saying that Omicron is a super spreader and therefore it spreads very fast, and hence it has affected so many people in IIT Hyderabad. Then you have to ask yourself this question: is IIT Hyderabad in Hyderabad the only place where people are staying in hostels? So let's talk about Usmania University. People they are trying to send people home. They are basically trying to send people home. People are protesting, students are protesting and saying, we won't go home. We will stay in the hostels. And we know how the hostels in Usmania are. I was reading the papers the other day, and it very clearly says that the hostels are jam-packed. The women's hostels, where 3 people are supposed to stay, there are almost 20 people or 25 people staying in the women's hostels, and that the conditions are similar in the men's hostels. Maybe not 25, but instead of 3, if there are 10 or even 6, why didn't it spread in Usmania University? Okay, why didn't COVID breakout happen in Usmania University? In University of Hyderabad, the hostels are open. They are asking them to leave now. That is a different issue. But till now, only one case of COVID has been registered in the uh, University of Hyderabad. So if you're looking at this kind of analysis, let's say, people are jam-packed even in University of Hyderabad. Why wasn't there this breakout that happened in IIT Hyderabad? Why hasn't it happened in uh, Usmania University? That is something that a narrative cannot tell you. A narrative can only tell you that in Usmania University, there are so many people per room. Okay, thank you. That's good. But if people are jam-packed, it should have been Usmania University where the COVID outbreak should have happened, not IIT Hyderabad, because there they are not jam-packed. So in a university, in hostels where people are jam-packed, and in a university, in an institution where in the hostels people are not jam-packed, you have the outbreak of the disease in a big way, but you don't have the outbreak of the disease in OU. How do you explain this? Okay, and medical professionals who are living on Usmania University Medical College hostels or living in them, these people are also contracting the disease. Even medical professionals are contracting the disease. All the house surgeons, junior doctors who all live in hostels of Usmania Medical College and Gandhi Medical College, they are all contracting the disease. Okay? The explanation could be that they are doing frontline duty and therefore they are coming into contact with patients who have COVID. And despite all the precautions, perhaps the virus has a way of spreading. Perhaps is the key word. Perhaps it has a way of spreading. We still do not have an analysis of why it is spreading in some places and why it is not spreading in some places. So the question is, how does a narrative convention explain all these things? It gives you a description. It basically gives you a description. It will tell you that things are like this, so and so things are happening. It gives you that description, but it cannot give you the analysis. And frankly speaking, I'm not in a position where I can analyze and tell you why people in OU have not contracted the disease and why people in IIT have contracted the disease. That is for medical professionals to do a job. So narratives and theories are not confined only to social sciences. They go into other kinds of fields as well. As we've seen, the examples that I've given you now are all non-social science examples, primarily non-social science. Okay, now the other day, since so many of you were not there, I'll repeat an example that I had given. The example is that in the 1980s, and I think the trend is still on, in Japan, youth in the age group of 25 to 28 were committing suicides. They were basically committing suicides. So the question is, why were they committing suicides? This is a social science question. And that too, why people in that particular age bracket, 25 to 28, and we all know Japan is one of the most developed countries, if not the most developed country. They have fantastic systems of medicine. They have everything that anyone can ask for. They have technologies for everything. So life, you would assume, in Japan is something which is very comfortable, happy. So why are people committing suicides? And that is when I also gave you the example of Emil Durkheim's PhD thesis. Emil Durkheim worked for his PhD on why people commit suicides, not the Japanese. This is, at the cusp of the 19th and 20th centuries. So if you look at that thesis, Emil Durkheim basically came up with an explanation that the reason why people mainly commit suicide is because of the fact that they experience a sense of alienation. He talked about the fact that, in societies which are mechanical solidarities, where you are forced to follow rules that you don't want to follow, in those kind of societies, he basically claimed that people have a tendency to commit suicide because people are constantly being pushed into doing things that they don't particularly like. Now, that's a theoretical explanation. But time has proved that Emil Durkheim is wrong. He is wrong because of the fact that after him, several instances have occurred. And in these instances, we find that what people thought would happen didn't happen. In fact, exactly the opposite of what people thought would happen happened. So let me give you an example of that. An example of that is Afghanistan. When the Americans landed up in Afghanistan to wage war on the Taliban are very much a creation of the Americans. Nevertheless, politically, nobody is a friend or an enemy forever. So friends can turn enemies. And that is what happened in the case of the United States of America. Now, if you look at the Taliban in Afghanistan, they had imposed Sharia. Sharia is the Islamic, what should I say, law. As per that, women had to wear burqas and men were not supposed to shave. They're supposed to grow beards. Now, when the Americans went into Afghanistan, the feminists in Europe and in America basically thought that the women will shed the burqas because it is something that has been imposed upon them. And if I may use a, a term from Durkheim, these are people who are basically following rules which they don't understand. No woman, they said, questioned why should we wear a burqa. So they thought, the European and the American feminists, they thought that the moment Afghanistan is liberated, the women will get rid of the burqas. Now, that didn't happen. Women continued to wear burqas. And when they were asked, now that you are in a position where you can say no to a burqa, why do you continue to wear it? They said, we feel secure. That is what some people said. The other people said that our religion and the Sharia basically stipulates that we wear this, which means that mechanical solidarities, as described by Emile Durkheim, are not necessarily alienating. Okay, because so many women in Afghanistan refused to give up the burqa. And the main reason they cited was that our religion asks us to do it. Some people might have said it is for security, okay? But most people answered that they were wearing burqas because their religion stipulated it. It's an unquestioning faith. unquestioning faith. Well, that's actually a redundancy. A faith is when you accept something unquestioningly. Anyway, so they were going by their faith. But funnily, the men all shaved. Nobody talked about the men. Everybody talked about the women. Nobody talked about the men. And the men came out onto the streets, all shaven and shorn, and they were fine, happy. Now the women were willing to follow the religion. The men were not willing to follow the tenets or some of the tenets of that religion. Same religion. Why? So Durkheim's understanding is inadequate, or possibly by calling it inadequate, I am actually being charitable to Durkheim. But I think it's completely plain wrong that in mechanical solidarities, people feel, and he mentions religion, basically religious rules, which he calls stifling. And he basically said that there is a sense of alienation when you don't understand laws that are made. And therefore, people were getting alienated. So, the example of Afghanistan, which is a complete social science example, is something that questions, repudiates the position that was given by, or rather taken by, Emile Durkheim, that religion and a mechanical solidarity is alienating, right? Now, why didn't men feel that they have to stick to they don't have to stick to this idea that they have to grow a beard? Why did men did not object to that? That's another question that begets an answer. Okay, like I said, they're from the same religion. So one would expect that they would basically follow the religion just like the women did. So if you want to understand this, then you basically have to understand Islam as practiced in Afghanistan. That is theory. Nobody did it is a different issue. But if you do a theory, you have to be able to explain. You have to be able to explain why these things are happening. Okay. So coming back to the example of Japan, is alienation really so powerful that it makes people end their lives? Because these people were not poor. Normally we'll say, uh, the other day I gave you this example, I'm repeating it again since many are new here. You'll say farmers' suicides is because they can't pay their debts. repay their debts, and their creditors are sitting on their heads. So, unable to bear that, these people have given up their lives by committing suicide. But that's an easy explanation. But in Japan, the people who were committing suicides were not necessarily people from a lower economic stratum. In fact, in Japan, there doesn't seem to be a lower economic stratum because everybody has, it's a small country, small population, high levels of development, and therefore most people are well off. In Japan, you hardly find people who are not well off, reasonably well off at least. So in that particular country, why are people, that too in the age group of 25 to 28, why were people committing suicides? Till today, there is no answer to that. Now, it was a long-winded explanation to tell you that narrative conventions are inadequate as explanatory frameworks. They are important because they inform us. They inform us about what is happening. So a description is not something that one looks down upon. Without a description, you cannot have an analysis. First, there has to be a description, and then there has to be an analysis. So if you take this framework into consideration, narrative conventions are extremely important, but they are not explanatory frameworks. Explanatory frameworks have to come from theory. Now, this paper is called Indian Political Theory. Now, if you look at this particular paper, the first chapter is that which talks about ancient India. Okay, I'm not going to go into the wording that is there in the syllabus because most of it is nonsense. Now, if you go into ancient India, I used a word the other day. I used a phrase rather the other day where I said it is a minefield. It is a minefield because there are all kinds of narratives. There are not only all kinds of narratives, there are also different kinds of narrative conventions that have been used. For example, Yakshagana is one of the narrative conventions which you don't find up north. You'll find it only in the south, and that too in this area which is Andhra Pradesh. Okay, so if you're looking at ancient India is not as easy as I can explain this in 2 minutes. It isn't that at all. It is something which is extremely complex. It is something that challenges your analytical abilities, and perhaps, despite using your best analytical abilities, you will still not be able to get a proper understanding of what ancient India was. I told you one of the biggest mistakes that has been made with reference to ancient India is the fact that people have done a sociology of the ancient past, whereas it's a cosmology. It's not a sociology, it's a cosmology. Now, I told you the other day, when you talk about a cosmology, what exactly are you saying? You are basically saying that this entire world is a universe and a cosmos. This is what I was talking about. And I had also told you, please don't go by the beauty pageants where Miss Universe is bigger than Miss World and Miss World is bigger than Miss Earth. Okay, people think that universe is somehow bigger than the world. That's not true. The world is a description. I mean, the world is just, it's not a, I'm sorry, it's not a description. The world is something that you use in order to denote where we are. But universe is a narration. It is something that tells you about the world. And possibly there are some theoretical considerations in it. Possibly some theoretical considerations are in it. Okay, now if you look at the way the world has been looked at, you can look at it as a universe or you can look at it as a multiverse. But most of the time, most people in the world, knowingly or unknowingly, have subscribed to the idea that the world is a universe and that it is also a cosmos. I'll stop here today. Tomorrow we'll pick this up. The idea of what a universe is, what a cosmos is, and how you have to treat ancient Indian philosophy. Please, there's no ancient Indian political thought. That is rubbish. I'll talk to you about that tomorrow. So, like I said, there are so many different narrative conventions from which so many different theories have been derived that it is an extremely difficult thing to correctly characterize ancient India. But the fascinating part, I'll start with this tomorrow. Ancient India is the only thing that has survived, albeit in a different form in modern times. In modern times, it has survived. One of the oldest civilizations has survived right till the modern period, though not in the same form. The form has changed. So we'll start with that tomorrow. We'll try to understand how it is a cosmology and how we should treat it that way. So thank you very much. I hope to see you all tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.